Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dana Savage, and I am here on behalf of the QLaw Bar Association of Washington. My pronouns are she and her, and today we'll be covering the topic of the Equality Act and why it is important for Washingtonians to care about it. Joining us today are Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, who's a member of the Democratic Party and a staunch supporter of the Equality Act, among many other achievements. Stella Keating, who's a founder of GenderCool and testified before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee on behalf of the Equality Act. Denise Diskin, who's the executive director of the QLaw Foundation and a legal expert on civil rights issues and intersectionality. Cyrus Mostaghim, who's a policy expert on federal regulations and has conducted extensive research on the implications of LGBTQ plus discrimination issues and federal rule interpretation. While he's appearing in his personal capacity and not on behalf of his agency, in his day job, he is the lead compensation specialist with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be with you all.
Let me find you. That's all. All right. So today I'm going to first talk with Congresswoman Jayapal, and then we will turn to the panel interview. I know Congresswoman Jayapal is extremely busy and has a lot going on, so thank you for giving us some of your time very early on.
Well, this is so important to me, Dana, and so I'm really grateful to QLaw and to the Commission and to GSBA for this opportunity to talk about this important piece of legislation that we've already passed in the House and just waiting for the Senate to act.
Yes, and let's chat about that, Congresswoman. Can you briefly describe for the audience, just broad strokes, what the Equality Act is and why is it important for us here in Washington?
Yes, well, the Equality Act extends federal protections to LGBTQ individuals in all arenas, and that includes housing, it includes education, it includes employment, even things like jury service, credit reporting, and it says that discrimination cannot happen in public places because, as you know, much of the discrimination that's reported happens in public places, public spaces. So it expands the definition of what a public space is so that even discrimination that occurs within a shop that you go to, for example, would not be permitted. And so this is a really important step forward to extend civil rights protections to LGBTQ individuals in all of these arenas and make sure that we are really prohibiting discrimination so that the statistics that we deal with today, where 1 in 3 LGBTQ individuals experience discrimination, 3 in 5 trans individuals experience discrimination, that simply cannot be any longer.
I agree. It's pretty bad out there, and we only seen it increase over the last few years. You mentioned that the Equality Act has passed Congress and has had at least a little bit of testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Have you heard any rumblings on your end that you can share on when it's going to be advanced through committee and voted on?
Well, it's already passed the House, so I'm very proud to say that not only did it pass the Judiciary Committee, but it passed the full House, and we Democrats stand very strongly in support of the Equality Act and the urgency of implementing it. The problem, Dana, is that it's stuck in the Senate, where there is unfortunately this terrible, arcane, racist rule called the filibuster that allows a minority of the Senate to control the agenda. So even though Democrats have control of the Senate, the truth is that without 60 votes because of the filibuster, Republicans, Mitch McConnell and Republicans can continue to block important pieces of legislation like the Equality Act. And that's why I've called for getting rid of the filibuster, eliminating the filibuster, so that we can pass important pieces of legislation that the majority of Americans want and that have already passed the House of Representatives.
I definitely think the filibuster is on a lot of our minds lately. That it sounds to me like that is the largest barrier to the Equality Act's passage. Is there anything else that is in the Senate that might be holding it up?
It really is about the filibuster. And then, of course, we would have to get 50 Democrats. And so, I think that with the Equality Act in the Senate, I think it has 50 Democrats ready to pass it. And then, of course, the vice president would cast the deciding 51st vote in that situation. And hopefully we would have some Republicans that would vote for it as well. And I think that's the thing that people don't understand when they talk about the filibuster as being, this important step towards bipartisanship. Actually, there are many pieces of legislation, and the Equality Act is one, where there is bipartisan support, but there may not be 10 Republican senators ready to pass it. And that's the situation right now. So let's get this thing passed in the Senate. Let's get rid of the filibuster for these important civil rights and voting rights protections. Let's get rid of it altogether. And then let's send the Equality Act to President Biden, who has already clearly said he is ready to sign it.
Now, what can we here in Washington, both people and businesses, do to support the bill further?
Well, the important thing, of course, is to help build the movement for this across the country. I feel like we've done so much of that in Washington State. We have such a great activist community supporting LGBTQ rights, and we've been a leader on this with marriage equality and other protections across the country. But we do need to get rid of the filibuster. So if you are in my district, then I support eliminating the filibuster, but contact your Congress member, contact your senator, and make sure that they understand why getting rid of the filibuster is so important, and make sure, of course, that they understand that we need to pass the Equality Act.
Thank you. And in general, this isn't your first time fighting for the LGBTQ plus community. You've also had some involvement with the Transgender Task Force of the Equality Caucus. Can you tell us a little bit more about your work there?
Yeah, well, my work on fighting for LGBTQ individuals goes back to actually when I ran One America, and which is an immigrant rights organization, and really did the work to organize amongst immigrant communities to support marriage equality and LGBTQ protections. But here in Congress, I am the proud co-chair of the Transgender Equality Task Force. And I'm also the proud mom of a trans kid. And it has been really amazing to see my Democratic colleagues in particular rally around the trans community at a time when we know there are so many anti-trans, hateful bills coming up in legislatures across the country. And Republican colleagues in Congress are, literally making this the hill that they want to die on in terms of attacking the trans community. And so I've been very proud to be starting this new transgender task force to look at all the ways in which we can support trans individuals across the country, to know that we see you, we hear you, we know how difficult this time is, particularly for trans people of color, but for all trans members, and also to know that there is a loud voice of trans moms in Congress and family members in Congress that are supporting the trans community. Hopefully we'll have a trans member of Congress soon, but right now at least we've got some strong allies, and we ourselves are fighting for our own family members, our community members, and the trans community at large across the country.
I must say, on behalf, as a trans woman, it's so wonderful to see this, I guess, groundswell of support for the community amidst all of these attempts to attack us. I know growing up, it was very hard for me and many other folks in my life, many other LGBTQ folks that I know, and just to see all of this work, it's really moving, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know your time is limited, so, and we have some discussion to move in with our other panelists. So Congresswoman Jayapal, I do want to thank you for appearing tonight, but if you have any other thoughts or remarks, we'd love to hear them.
Dana, thank you so much for all the organizing work that you're doing. I guess the last thing I'll say is I'm an organizer through and through. That's my background, as a civil rights and economic justice and racial justice organizer. And I really believe that you and all the people that listen to this, all the people that take action to urge your member of Congress to do something and pass this bill, are actually what allows change to happen. So thank you so much. And we are pride strong here in Washington State. And I promise I'll be fighting all the way till the end. And hopefully that's gonna happen very soon with the Equality Act.
I hope so too. It'd be an excellent pride present.
Yes, it would.
Alrighty. Have a great day.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Now we're going to move into our other panelists, Cyrus, Denise, and Stella. Hello, everyone. How are you all?
I'm great. Thank you. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah.
All right.
Definitely glad to see you all. And Stella, thank you for joining us. I know you're extremely busy with everything that you're doing. And so I just want to thank you for your time.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm super excited about this.
Awesome. Well, the questions I have for you all are going to be directed at particular individuals based on your expertise. But if you hear any questions you want to jump in and add on to after the panelist has had a chance to speak, I'd be more than happy for that to happen. And I love a fruitful discussion on especially topics such as this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of popcorn around at natural segue points in these questions. So just because I move on to someone else after I ask you a question doesn't mean you're out of the hot seat. Is that okay with you all? Awesome.
Sure.
Let's start with you, Stella. You just gave a few months ago now, I guess, some extremely moving testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like and what happened following your testimony?
Yeah, it was very intimidating, very like kind of scary almost, and it was also just super exciting because I knew that the impact that it would have, and I knew that I would be able to. I was excited because I knew that I'd be able to create lasting change, which felt really amazing and so but yeah, after my testimony, I didn't expect the kind of response that did come to me, and it was all positive. It was completely positive. I didn't ever feel like attacked or anything. And I just felt that was so incredible and reminded me of how far we've come as a society and as a group of people. And so, but the response has been amazing. I've been able to meet so many incredible people, and yeah.
Yeah, you did meet quite a few people, it sounds like. Have you had any conversations with any lawmakers afterwards or anything of that nature?
Yeah, I've had a few conversations. I had pretty soon after the testimony, I had a conversation with Senator Baldwin from Wisconsin, which was really incredible, an amazing conversation that we had. And then I also messaged with Senator Cory Booker as well, which was amazing. It was super cool. And then also Representative Derek Kilmer, Congresswoman Strickland, who's my former mayor, which is so excited to see. I'm so excited that she's where she is now. It's super incredible. And then also Senator Klobuchar as well, which was super cool. And yeah, I feel like I'm missing one, but I can't remember.
That is quite the contact list going into college.
Yes, it is.
What do they want to know most when they reached out to you?
A lot of them were mostly just being in support of me, which also felt really incredible and again reminded me of how far we've come. And Senator Booker actually texted me and just kind of was like, I give you my support. You are seen, and I will, me and my staff will help you in any way that we can, which was really incredible. And then, a lot of them were just telling me how incredible what I did was, and how excited they were to see me be up, to testify, and how much they supported me, which was just really incredible.
That's amazing. And your testimony's been the talk of the town, so I know you made an impact.
Thank you.
Denise, I have a question for you about the Equality Act in Washington State. Can you please go a little bit into detail about what the practical effect would be for its passage here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dana. And thank you, Stella, for your amazing contributions to moving this bill forward. You know, I've been out for 22 years now, and I remember that there was a version of the Equality Act that died in committee about 15 or 20 years ago. So it's just every time I see folks working so hard to advance this bill forward so that one day we can actually get passage and we get closer every time and our stories get deeper and our advocates get stronger, and it just makes me so happy. So thank you for carrying that forward. So practical effects in Washington. So I think that one of the things that I really look to federal legislation to do in Washington is to really set a tone, right? We have pretty solid laws here in Washington and under our state laws. So our state legislature has done a pretty good job of protecting LGBTQ people in most areas of life. But I think one of the things that I really see when federal legislation shifts, when the federal government either, you know, for the last several years took away rights from LGBTQ people or now starts to reinstate rights for LGBTQ people on a federal level, it really sets the temperature for how things go in Washington. And I also think that there are a lot of areas in our state where, legal areas in our state where federal law applies, where state law actually doesn't apply, or where there's some additional clarity. And I know we're going to talk in a little bit of detail about what the bill will actually do, but there are some areas where there's additional clarity that there isn't under state law, which doesn't mean that those areas aren't protected. It just means that nobody has kind of tried it out yet, or nobody has filed a particular complaint and asked a state agency or a court to say, hey, what about an online forum, right? Which is one area where the Equality Act really expands protections. You know, it really just sort of takes us into the 21st century in terms of what our protections look like. So we're not just talking about public accommodations as restaurants, businesses, movie theaters, and stadiums, but we're talking about all of the different places that LGBTQ people live our lives, whether that's, you know, healthcare facilities, whether that's the coffee shop down the street, you know, there's all kinds of, you know, whether that's an online forum where we do business, there's all kinds of different places where we participate in public life. And so I think the Equality Act, you know, I was just rereading the language actually this afternoon. And I think it really puts into real life language where discrimination occurs and what it looks like. And I think that that's really powerful here in Washington. And the other thing I'll say about the state of Washington is that we're a really big state with a lot of diversity, and that includes a lot of diversity of communities and community relationships. And I think that, you know, QLaw Foundation works a lot with folks in rural areas and is really building a lot of connections, particularly east of the Cascades. And I think one of the things that you know, our siblings on the east side of the state are really sharing and lifting up that I think stories that don't get told in Seattle and Olympia all that often are about what it's like to be in a community where you're not only the minority, but where it is socially acceptable to discriminate. And I think, I just think that's a really different world. And for folks, particularly folks living on the border with Idaho, which has, you know, few to no protections and really, really, really brave civil rights litigation happening right now, I think there's really good, I think that there's really good protection in federal law that can help us make sure that, you know, your world doesn't change entirely when you cross the state line.
Speaking of which, you mentioned that there's some research and data that can be used to show this kind of discrimination. Cyrus, you've done some research on LGBTQ plus issues within federal agencies and trends. Can you talk a little bit about things that you've noticed?
Sure, and I have to say one technically required thing from on my agency's behalf, even though you said it, I have to actually say it as well. While I am an employee of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, I am here in my private capacity as a citizen. Nothing that I say should be construed as a representation or position of the agency. So now that I've said that and satisfied my legal ethics requirements,
Oh, we all,
I can answer the question. I mean, there's so much when you talk about at the agency level, and not to give the like lawyer it depends answer, but it really does depend on the agency and what type of protection that you have. When you're talking about, most recently, my agency released its interpretive rule that under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, sexual orientation and gender identity are protected as forms of sex discrimination. An interpretive rule is kind of like a presidential executive order. It can change on the administration, here today, gone tomorrow. Whereas, the Bostock case for Title VII is a federal law. That's fully there. There is no way that an administrative agency can kind of take that away in a very easy manner. So it really does depend on the agency. So like HUD has their equal access rule. That's a formal rule where it has the force of the law. It takes a lot more effort. It has to go through almost a similar process, a very time-consuming process to modify a federal rule as opposed to the interpretive rule. But you've got it all over the place when it's access to consumer finance. There are academic studies that show potential discrimination against same-sex applicants. We can't say same-sex couples because we don't know the actual sexual orientation of these individuals. So they had to build an inference to determine it. And they've determined that same-sex applicants are charged more interest, between 0.02 to 0.2% more interest across the life of their mortgage, which is a lot of money across probably the largest purchase of your life for that part, and they're denied at a higher rate. But even outside of access to consumer finance, you're talking about the most recent Trump administration trying to do healthcare with allowing healthcare providers to choose not to serve somebody because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. That was a final rule that was finalized from the Affordable Care Act. And we're dealing with the kind of aftermath with Bostock saying, okay, well, based off of Bostock, this is probably a no longer valid rule, and it hasn't made its way up to the federal level. And even in a couple years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, even adoption and parenthood, a gay couple that had a surrogate in Canada deliver their baby in Canada, you had an issue where because it was two men under the Obama administration, the child would have had American citizenship. These parents had to go through so much extra just to get their daughter's citizenship, which is something that a heterosexual couple would instantly be able to do for a surrogate from out of the country. So it really is a big lay of the land of what the issue is. Is there an actual law about it? If there's not, if there's a formal rule or if there's an informal rule, and it's very nebulous and always evolving, sometimes here, sometimes not.
Yeah, it sounds like it. That's quite complicated, and just sounds like a complete Gordian knot to even try to begin to untangle.
Yes, and a lot of us are in the legal field, so that's it's a little easier for us, let alone the layperson who's just trying to live their life and be a normal person traveling or doing other things.
Speaking of which, Stella, you're a high schooler. You're looking at college. I know in your testimony you mentioned that was a concern. How have those concerns evolved or grown since the day of your testimony and all the just everything coming at you in the wake of it?
Yeah, I think that especially with all of these laws that are laws and bills that are still being passed that are blatantly transphobic in states, like that is still happening, which is crazy to think about and very disappointing as well. And I've seen more than be passed and signed into law, that again, like my options were already kind of limited before my testimony and during my testimony. These laws are now passing, and now my options are starting to increasingly shrink, and I will only have so many colleges that I'll be able to go to and still be protected. And even if I'm protected by a college, that's only in the college. I'm not protected for going to my doctor or going into a restaurant or so many other things that are part of our everyday life, buying a house, renting an apartment, something like that, if I'm living somewhere. And so for colleges, and my concern is just starting to grow, as my options are starting to shrink.
I understand, and I can't imagine what that must feel like at this time, because we're lucky here in Washington. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
We're very, very lucky. Denise, I know we already have a lot of protections here, but what does the Equality Act do to improve housing, or employment, or healthcare, and specifically, how does that relate to religious organizations?
Yeah, so to answer your question about housing and healthcare, I think the Equality Act has really big impact in those two areas in particular. You know, as Cyrus and Stella have really talked about, it really encompasses all of the different aspects of life. I mean, it's one of the beautiful things, that was one of the most beautiful things about the Civil Rights Act when it was written, and it is one of the most beautiful things about the Equality Act as it is written now, is it really speaks to what is it that we experience as LGBTQ people as we move through the world? What are the different points of contact? What are the ways that we participate, right? Like, we're members of society, right? Like, we do things. For housing, I think one of the big things about housing is that, you know, laws get written and then they get clarified in the court. So, you know, a law gets written, and then through a series of court cases, you know, we sort of have the opportunity to figure out, okay, well then how does this law that's written to cover all situations, how does it work in this situation? And then what about this situation? And in housing in particular, most of those cases have been brought under federal housing discrimination law. There's very few state level housing discrimination cases here in Washington. And none that I know of that specifically test housing discrimination related to LGBTQ people. And the important thing about that is that our state laws will also interpret discrimination and how discrimination laws protect people based on the scenarios that are presented in federal cases. So what that means is that by having housing really specifically laid out and included in the Equality Act, we get a lot more clarity under Washington law without us having to file a lot of cases in Washington, which I think is really, really important. For healthcare, you know, there are areas of healthcare that are actually only governed by federal law, particularly around certain types of health insurance plans. And I know a lot of folks have trouble with health insurance plans. I mean, I think we all have trouble with health insurance plans generally, but I think in particular, sorry, my dog apparently heard a squirrel outside. In particular, folks have trouble with health insurance plans around gender affirming care. And so that's an area where we really, where I think that the Equality Act has a really big impact, because it really says nationwide, and to all of these health insurers that administer protections, you know, and administer healthcare to people nationwide, this is how it's going to go, right? This is who you're going to serve and how you're going to serve them. Now, you asked about religious organizations, and that's a little bit of a, I will say that is where I have seen, as I sort of look at the lay of the land, that's where I have seen the greatest opposition to this bill coming out. Because I think if you ask most people, like Joe Schmo on the street, you know, do you think that all people should be treated fairly regardless of, you know, their race, their religion, what they believe in, who they love? They will probably say, yeah, right? I think we all kind of want to be in that world. But I think that when we're talking about religious beliefs and religious organizations, what I think those folks see in the Equality Act is, or what they perceive is, that it is set up to kind of tell everybody what they have to believe, right? They're sort of interpreting it as a requirement that you agree with, you know, that LGBTQ identities are rad and awesome in order to, you know, not have, I don't know, a bunch of activists come after you. That's sort of the vibe that I get. And I think that, you know, what I think is really the fundamental mistake there is that being LGBTQ is not a belief system, right? LGBTQ communities, we have our own diversity of belief systems, right? We have our own diversity of beliefs within our communities. We are not a belief system. We are an identity, right? We are a community. We are a group of people, just like all of the other groups of people, including religious groups, that are protected from discrimination under the Equality Act. And so I think that that's one really, really fundamental thing that is, really fundamental thing that is important to kind of ground us in this, is that it does not control your beliefs. You can believe anything you want about LGBTQ people, including how awesome we are. What matters is you have to treat us like we're awesome, just like you would treat anybody else you think is awesome. So I think that's one fundamental thing. I think, to sort of dive into the legal stuff for just a second, I will say that the Equality Act does not take anything away from religious organizations. So while it expands the kinds of places that are protected explicitly under the statute, religious organizations have always had an exemption under federal law that says you can treat members of your religious group more favorably than other groups. So for example, a religious organization does not have to hire or it can prioritize hiring for members of their own religious group. So if a Catholic organization wants to say you must be Catholic to work here, that's totally okay under Title VII, which is one of the sections that is governed by the Equality Act. And that exception isn't going anywhere. What really this law says is those exceptions extend to all of these other areas of the Civil Rights Act. And it says you cannot use the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which I'm not going to get real nerdy about it, but generally speaking, what that law says is if you're in private business, it's about how your religious freedoms are protected when you're in sort of other areas. So it's almost like a similarly expansive bill for religious freedom. And what the Equality Act says is you cannot use that law, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, you cannot use that law as a defense for discrimination. Really, in real people language, what that means is religion is not a license to discriminate. Like I said, you can, religious organizations, religious entities have the ability to prioritize and be favorable to members of their own religion. That doesn't change under the Equality Act. What it means is that you have to treat all other groups of people with equality, with dignity, with respect.
So it sounds like I'm not going to become a Catholic priest anytime soon, but it means under this act, I will be able to buy my cake.
It means you will be able to buy your cake from a baking Catholic priest if you want to, as long as that baking Catholic priest offers cakes to the general public.
Well, it is widely known that the Catholic priests have some amazing recipes, so I'll be looking out for this. Cyrus, you talked a little about some of the agency policy struggles. Some of them come and go, others seem pretty hard set. President Obama and now Biden have made instituting LGBTQ plus protections a priority for their administrations. Why aren't those enough? What is it like for these agencies in responding to these policy directives?
Well, for their kind of policy things, it goes back to what I said about the executive orders. They are kind of the guidance for the administration. Here today, gone tomorrow if the next administration doesn't like it. Some of them last for multiple administrations because each new president supports that policy directive. But as we've seen, it is kind of a here today, gone tomorrow between the two different parties. And with President Biden's Executive Order 13988, it is very expansive from a guidance of directing federal agencies to look at their rules and regulations and see if there's anything out there that doesn't conform with this guidance and take appropriate steps to, amend those rules and regulations to implement the vision and take any additional steps. So if there is a way where there's ambiguity in a law under administrative agency jurisdiction where they could see a way to provide protection and it's not explicitly there, they should go forward and do that. The problem with that is these federal agencies all have so many other things. This is a very important task, but it's one of the many different things that an agency is working on. Their general mission, their general and all the mission work, and creating formal rules and regulation takes a lot of time and a lot of manpower. An interpretive rule like what CFPB did is pretty easy to do but again, like an executive order, as I said, here today, gone tomorrow. So it really is, the heads of those agencies, their regulation divisions, taking a look at the time and the resources and the requirements needed to make a formal rule through formal rulemaking or notice and commenting, any version of rulemaking without going into the administrative law geek of the different types of rulemaking, but any rule that actually has the force of the law. They have to decide, how many people it's going to take, the time, the resources, because it requires so much, giving the public time to know that this is what we want to do, this is what we're thinking. Give us your thoughts, your feedback. The industry groups are going to comment, the public is going to comment. All of that takes time to say, hey, this is what we're thinking. Please tell us your thoughts. Review those thoughts, and then go through all the rounds of, okay, now that we've heard round one, we've changed these things because of your input. Please give us thoughts on round two of what we're thinking. That, a formal rule can take, multiple years to create, and a presidential administration at minimum gets 4 years, maybe 8 years if they're lucky. And to try and implement all of those type of protections through a concrete process is, I don't want to say completely impossible. They, they could say prioritize all the LGBTQ related stuff and then it would get done, but that's not actually, plausible. So that's really where it's, it's not enough. The Equality Act would basically give a jump start to a lot of that, where it creates a baseline of here is where the anti-discrimination protection is through all these places. Administrative agencies, you've already got this kind of floor. Now you can define what discrimination in housing is, what discrimination in access to healthcare is, or education discrimination, so that Stella has more options and isn't afraid for going out of state or anything. That's really where the administrative rulemaking process shines. After you've got the base level, they can do all that. Here's those real life scenarios, as Denise said, of this is how it really actually happens in the real world and how it's defined and how we will react to it. That's really why we need something like the Equality Act to give administrative agencies that kind of base level mission start point.
Yeah, it sounds like you're just kind of out in the middle of the ocean with not much for a paddle at the moment.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it. Stella, I want to talk a little about your work with GenderCool. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how you came to be involved?
Yeah, so I'm actually I'm one of the original champions. I'm not technically a founder.
My mistake.
But I'm one of the original champions. It's no worries. It happens all the time. I'm one of the original 5 champions, and I got involved. Mostly because I know people, and mostly because my mom knows people, and that's essentially how I got involved with the GenderCool project. And but yeah, so the GenderCool project is a really incredible organization. Our goal is to, well, I'll back up. There's a staggering amount of people who have not met a transgender person. I can't remember what the specific statistic is, but it's like 1 out of some number of people have met a transgender person. And our goal is to essentially create an experience for people to meet transgender people and to have an actual experience with them. And our goal, our motto is sharing our stories about who we are, not what we are. So, for example, I'm a future politician, and
future.
Well, thank you. But so we have multiple other champions who are engaged in an array of groups and people. And so, that's kind of our goal, is to just create an experience so that more and more people can say that they have met a transgender person and have had a positive experience with them. Because that's the other thing. People create opinions about transgender people without even meeting transgender people. And it's just really disappointing because being trans is not my entire identity. You know, I'm still 16. I still like to do 16-year-old things. I still am in school. You know, I'm still overwhelmed and have stress and anxiety about all, like, school and stuff. You know, I'm a normal kid. There's nothing different about me. There's just, you know, like all kids, another special thing. I happen to be transgender. You know, there are other kids who like just happen to have a beautiful part of them that's really incredible. My thing, well, not just that, but one of my many things is being transgender. And so that's really the goal of the GenderCool project. And you can find out more about the GenderCool project at gendercool.org.
GenderCool.org. That's a great website. Folks, write that down. Denise, I want to talk a little bit, not to get a little heavy on the subject, but we are living in a time when it seems more people than ever are paying attention and attempting to take meaningful action against America's racism problem. Why should we be thinking about the Equality Act when we're in a very real opportunity to address other longstanding issues in our society that have absolutely crushed other marginalized groups?
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to say is that I don't see any marginalized group that is crushed. We are brilliant and we are resilient and we are here every day. I will say that I have been inspired and led by, you know, the folks in our communities, the Black folks, the Indigenous folks, the people of color, the immigrant folks, who are just doing brilliant organizing that, you know, as a white person raised in white culture, I'm like, we ever thought of that? You know, like, there's just, it's just really, we are living and being led by just such phenomenal people. So, but to your question about what this statute does about intersectionality, I think one of the things that is really damaging about discrimination is the way that it attempts to parse people into what Stella was saying, right? What we are, not who we are. And I will tell you, I've been litigating civil rights cases for over 10 years, you know, filing all kinds of suits in court against, you know, pretty much every type of employer you can imagine. Sorry, employers. But I think, but I will tell you, you know, I've interviewed probably 1,000 witnesses and people who have engaged in discrimination, and I have never in my life met a picky bigot. Meaning, I have never in my life met somebody whose discrimination was based on sexual orientation, but was not also based on racism, or that was based on racism that was not also based on somebody's gender presentation, or that was based on somebody's religious identity that was not also based on race, on national origin, right? Like, we are whole people, and I think that what discrimination laws have previously asked us to do is to bring discrimination claims and sort of choose which discrimination that happened was the worst. So it was even in some cases, it has even been argued as a defense to discrimination, right? So a person who discriminated or a business that discriminated would say, no, we didn't discriminate on the basis of this person's race. And we didn't, you know, we discriminated maybe on both bases, you know, race and gender, but you can't prove that it was one or both, right? And so because you can't prove which one it was, you can't prove that it was illegal at all, right? It's sort of an oversimplification of the legal argument. So if you're a discrimination attorney and you're listening to me say this and your head is exploding, you know, forgive me. But what is so important about the Equality Act is that it explicitly says that you can bring multiple types of discrimination claims, right? That multiple types of discrimination can exist at the same time. And I think, in fact, what we know about discrimination is that it doesn't just happen, like, you don't just tick boxes, right? Like, this discrimination happened based on my race, based on my national origin, and based on my gender presentation, right? It happens in sort of a way where you're looking at the Venn diagram, like, and that is its own unique kind of discrimination. And I think that that's why it's so important that the Equality Act is such a sort of like interwoven statute in terms of the way that it's interwoven in all areas of life and the way that it interweaves together all different types of protected categories. Because again, it is saying we get to exist in this, in our communities, in our society, based on who we are, not what we are. And Stella, I'm going to say that a lot because you just really distilled it so beautifully. I will give you credit, I promise. And I just think that that's really, I think that that's really important. And I think it's really important in terms of how, you know, we're at a really crucial moment in our culture right now. And the moment is we have to ask ourselves as a culture, what are we going to be okay with? Are we going to be okay with the atrocities that have happened for the last 500-ish years on this land? Or are we going to learn to think differently? And I don't mean are Black, Indigenous, people of color going to learn to think differently? I mean, are we as white people going to learn to think differently? And are we going to ask our structures of power to think differently? Right? You could take every single racist person out of our systems and our systems would still operate in a racist way. And that is what acts like the Equality Act, where it says, you know, we're talking about the ways that these things happen in the real world. We're talking about people as who they are. And we're talking about how discrimination actually functions, right? That's why that's so crucial. Our laws have to reflect the way that we live, not the other way around. And I think it's been the other way around for a long time. And I think that that's, you know, I think that really erodes people's trust in the legal system, rightly so. I know a lot of people, you know, and we're working in a lot of communities where folks are like, look, the legal system happens to me. I don't go to the legal system. Why would I want to bang on that door, right? That sounds like a lot of trouble. And I think that that's, you know, that's right. Like our communities are not stupid, right? Like we know how to take care of ourselves and we know how to take care of each other. And so I think it's really important that we have laws that that allow us to do that and really reflect how we live.
It just sounds like this is going to be a huge leap forward should it pass. It's almost like it's the glue that would allow the Civil Rights Act to have all the teeth that we've hoped it's had for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, let's not gild the lily here. A statute is still a piece of paper, right?
Yes.
It's just a piece of paper. We got to act it out. But I think it's a pretty important piece of paper. It says some pretty good stuff, and I think it gives us some pretty good tools to work with to really, you know, ground our activism and force our systems to behave differently while we go and do all of the other amazing system-changing organizing that we're doing. Definitely.
And speaking of action, Cyrus, I have a question because, again, like we've said over and over, Washington has great protections here for LGBTQ plus folks, but why is the Equality Act important, and what's important for us to keep in mind when we're interacting with federal agencies?
Well, I think Denise, for like at your state level, really hit the nail on the head with the federal legislation can help clarify a lot of things at the state level without state residents. I'm sitting here, it's really hard for me to say Washingtonian since I'm in DC, so I'm a different type of Washingtonian. But to her point of, you know, it really helps clarify things without having to bring cases at the state level. It's that wonderful constitutional law thing of federalism. If it's illegal federally, it can't be legal state-wise. And, you know, there are always some tensions where states can always have more restrictive requirements as long as they don't interfere with the implementation of the federal level law. So that's, you know, why Washington and a lot of other states are able to have the anti-discrimination laws that they have at a more nuanced way. So perhaps even Washington might be able to help lead some of the thought and implementation on the Equality Act at the administrative level if Washington's state's administrative agencies have done some rulemaking at the state level for that. But, you know, not only that, people from your state, citizens from the state of Washington should care about that, because you don't live in just Washington. You're gonna go elsewhere. You know, I hope that Stella can go to whatever college she wants to in whatever state she wants to and be just as protected in that state as she is in Washington state. And that really is the importance of the Equality Act, and voicing support through your representation that actually has voting ability. Little DC joke, we have no voting ability, so we're represented no votes. But you know, that really is it. You don't live in the bubble of Washington state, and When you look back at the progress of gay rights, when it came to like gay marriage, people who were married in a state that recognized it before it became legal, in 2015, barely 6 years ago, married couples had to do all this extra legal work, a power of attorney, medical representation, all these special legal contracts and documents that they had to put together and have on file just in case they happened to go to a state that didn't recognize their marriage, so that their partner could go see them if they were injured on vacation. Their partner could make the medical decisions that were necessary. When it comes to our community and the fact that, it's a lot easier for the younger generation, but for the older generation, there was a lot of, you only had your chosen family. And in order to protect yourself, you had to do all those things to make sure that the people who really would do right by your intent would make those decisions, and potentially not family by blood that have disowned you. There's, without going into the whole story, there's a lot of queer history related to those types of events that I encourage people to go research on their own, because I know we're out of time, but that really is kind of the learning experience. History repeats itself. And you could probably make so many different hypotheticals of what happens outside of Washington State, where you have these protections you enjoy, but you might not enjoy that in this state, but maybe that state. By voicing that support to the Equality Act, it makes it, like I said, we've set the floor. Here it is. You can't do it under anything under federal law, and let the federal side take over from providing guidance at the federal level. It provides the clarification Denise says makes life easier from a state level litigation perspective. It just kind of, like, as I said, it sets the floor. It gets you going, and it provides you all the protection that is uniform versus the here today, gone tomorrow. Can I go there? Am I safe there? Can I even go to school there? Can I use a bathroom in that state? Those are things that are still being litigated. We're litigating bathroom laws at the Supreme Court level. From a privacy perspective. And these are all things that you just want to live your life. And by getting that support nationally, getting your representatives to do that will help get us one step closer to having the ability to just live our lives everywhere we go in this country.
It seems to be a theme of the discussion today. Stella, based on your experience, what can we in the community do to become more engaged in supporting the Equality Act? Do you have any tips or lessons learned from your experience in taking such a national profile on this issue?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing to do is really just sharing information about the Equality Act. I talked to a few of my peers and my friends who didn't know what the Equality Act was, and that's not great. It's not the best thing. People should really know what the Equality Act is and how it will work and how it will be put into effect, and how it will continuously be in effect. And so I think that, like, the most important thing is to, first of all, share, talk about the Equality Act, post about it on social media or something, and contact your legislators, excuse me. And I think that that's also really important as well. And just making it clear to your representatives and the people who represent you, like, there are people in your district or in your state that want to see this passed, that need to see this passed. And so I think that that's just really important. Those are the two things that I would do that are also not that hard. You can find a simple pre-written letter on the internet somewhere about the Equality Act, and that is for, sending to your representatives. Just find one of those, copy and paste it into an email to them, and just send it. Like, it takes you maybe 5 minutes. It shouldn't take that long. And so it's one of the easiest things that you can do.
What about our fellow young folks who want our elected officials to hear their voices more? Anything you learned in getting to the point where your voice was heard?
Just really, like, show up, show up to things like this. because I found myself showing up to places that I didn't expect to like ask any questions or give any comments to anything, and I'd made a larger impact than I intended to. I had attended a forum with my mayor one time while she was running for her first time, and I asked for for there to be a youth commission in our city to give youth a voice, and it happened. I didn't mean to, but it did happen. And so, I think that kind of, the more aggressive way to put it is give yourself a seat at the table. Just do that for yourself. And I think that that's another really important thing that young people can do, because sharing your voice and sharing your opinions is really important, because it also can give people a perspective about your side of things and where you come from and why you have that opinion and why it's so important or whatever.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing all of that. Well, we are just about out of time, but I want to give each of you here, if you have any closing thoughts or remarks that you want to make, now would be the time to do it. Go ahead, whoever wants to go first.
Well, I think I'll just close. It's hard to follow, Stella, because I get so fired up when you're talking about reaching out to your legislators. And, one of the things that I have learned in my career of being somebody who makes people angry for a living is that you don't tell your story because you expect it to be heard. You tell it because you have to tell it, right? You're telling it for you, not for the listener. The listener can do whatever they want, right? That's they got to go to bed at night right with who they want to be right with, right? Just like we do. And from my perspective, I think that every time we speak up about what happens, every time we speak the truth about our lives, we are making a huge difference. Even if it feels like we're kind of yelling into a hole, I think that it's all about the community that we're building and being whole in ourselves. And I find that very powerful, particularly on the tough days where, we'll probably get a Supreme Court decision on LGBTQ rights, particularly related to religious organizations that want to discriminate. That will probably come out this month. These cases always come out in June. It always sucks. And those are the things that keep me going, is really just seeing folks connecting and creating relationships over time. So it's just such an honor to be part of this conversation.
Yes, thank you for being here. Cyrus or Stella, any last thoughts?
Yeah, kind of building off what Denise and Stella said, like, show up, give your support, and once it's done, when it's done, that doesn't mean it's over. For everything that I've talked about, the Equality Act, again, is the baseline. Tell your state level or tell your federal level regulators on the things that are impacting you. As you said, I've done a lot of research on this, primarily in financial regulation. When it comes to like the Equality Act, there are, 5, 7, I've lost count of how many actual consumer finance protection laws there is, but that doesn't say what's illegal under all those. You have to tell them the things that you've experienced so that they could say, okay, this is an example of what is illegal. And one thing I think about particularly to our community is like the Fair Debt Collection Practice Act. Our community being outed is very traumatic and can be very, devastating, from a loss of support, finances, and everything. And when it comes to debt collection practices, nobody else is going to deal with the kind of level of harassment that, it would be up to potentially the federal regulators to say, you know what, threatening to out somebody at work, or that's protected under Title VII in some ways if they out somebody and they get discriminated against. But if they're threatening to out you to your family, or they start calling you hateful language, all the different things that are slung at our community, those are technically considered harassing actions that are unique to our community. And those regulators need to know those experiences to write those rules and regulations to say, okay, well, it is illegal. Here are the examples. This is how. Build out that kind of defining the real life experiences. So it doesn't just stop at the Equality Act. And you have to continue to participate. tell your story, and let everybody know how this one aspect of us ends up being much more of a thing that we have to deal with. So eventually it hopefully becomes just, you know, a different part of us that, as Stella says, is just one part of the many things that makes her an amazing woman.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to give like a little quick plug. GenderCool is actually coming out with 3 books this month in partnership with with the company A Kid's Book About. And I didn't want to say the wrong thing. And we're gonna have 3 books coming out. One is A Kid's Book About being transgender, about being non-binary, and being inclusive. And so it's written by all the GenderCool champions, or at least all the champions had some form of involvement with writing it. And then other champions wrote the actual books, and it's really exciting. It's really incredible. And you can purchase the books on GenderCool, the GenderCool's website, gendercool.org again. And so they're a really great way to also just learn more really easily, and to also to tell kids about being transgender, because we need more young people coming out, like young people, tiny little things, you know, we need those people to come out more often so that we can create a more acceptance in our world.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And again, I just want to thank all of you panelists, Cyrus, Stella, Denise, for taking your time. Obviously, Congresswoman Jayapal for taking a few moments to chat with us a bit more about what she's seeing over in Washington as she tries to help this legislation get passed. I want to thank the Washington LGBTQ Commission for hosting us today and hosting this video, the GSBA and QLaw Foundation, as always, of course, all the folks who've put in countless hours in not only this effort, but all the other efforts that we've been working on in the past years and years and years, and trying to ensure that we do have equal protection under the laws and a right to exist and just live our lives. And finally, I want to thank our audience for taking a few moments out of your day to learn about this important issue. I'm Dana Savage. Have a great night.